Panel titled Harmonization versus Competition, What Brings Us Back on the Path to Growth, I would like to call Professor Stylianos Foundas, Mr. Andreas Stefanidis, He's still outside. Somebody has to go and call him. We need him. And also Mr. Terry Anker. I would also like to call Mr. Razin Salih.
So can we go ahead, I guess?
I think so.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is the second panel dealing with harmonization versus competition. What brings us back on track on the road to growth? My name is Stylianos Foundas. I'm in the Department of Economics of the University of Macedonia. This panel looks at questions that relate to growth in the European Union. Questions like, can we enhance growth using various foreign stimulus packages? Can Greece return to become a competitive, developed economy? What is the role of entrepreneurship in an economy? These issues are of great relevance given the current financial and economic crisis in Greece. And we have a number of speakers who will talk to us about these issues. So, our keynote speaker is Andreas Stefanidis. He's the president of the Hellenic Association of Youth Entrepreneurs and the Academy of Entrepreneurship. You can start, yeah? About 12 minutes.
The microphone, because the other one, but I would like to walk.
Oh.
If it is possible. Yeah, the microphone. The other one, not this one. The one that I can step. Yes. Yes. How was that? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to all of you. It's a great pleasure and honor to be with you in this international conference. I would like very much to thank the organizer and especially Milenko for his invitation to participate in this important conference for Free Market Roadshow, and also to thank very much the University of Macedonia. Now, I would like to give the optimist side of the crisis. So, as you said, my name is Andreas Stefanidis. 11 years ago, we started the first association of young entrepreneurs in Greece, trying to support youth entrepreneurship with one important element to find unemployment of youth. So improving European countries' relationship, because the problem of Greece is not a Greek problem. Of course, we have many political problems in Greece, but it's a European problem, and we have to see the solution at European level. So European challenges. One is the difficulties we face lie not in deciding what our goals should be, but in determining how to achieve them. So remember, 10% in life, what happens in us, is what happens actually, and 90% is how we react to it, so our attitude. Second, our problem in this area are problems of implementation. So many times we've listened to solutions all over Europe, but on the implementation side, we have problems. Number three, how can we reach goals that are often perfectly clear but seemingly difficult to attain, especially on a political level? What are the obstacles at European level? What are the barriers? Number one, large systems have become too complex to be understood. Especially at political level, this is obvious. Second, bureaucracy, or as we usually call it in Europe, red tape, makes it impossible to get anything done. If you try to start a business in Greece, you will see the tremendous way of paperwork we have to go through. And that's, cuts the competitive advantage compared with other EU countries or in the United States especially. I cannot agree more from the speakers of the previous panel. Intergroup hostility paralyzes all constructive effort. We do not have political decision and implementation of them, especially for youth entrepreneurship. Fourth, power politics undermine and subvert rational action. And fifth, irrationality and human resistance to change defeat even the wisest programs. Don't forget that also the societies are responsible for the problems, because the human mindset cannot change from one day to the other. Crisis supports on this direction. So what are the priorities for supporting not just Greek entrepreneurship, but European? Why? In Greece we have 52% unemployment of youth, and this is a tremendous number. I will give you another very important statistics to remember. At European level, we have 23 million small and medium enterprises, and we have 23 million unemployed people. So that means if we support the small and micro businesses to employ just one employee, we stop unemployment of Europe in one day. Okay? What do we need finally? First of all, we need a vision. If you start your own business, you cannot succeed if you don't have a vision. That's for sure. Even if you have money, if you have an excellent location, if you don't have a vision to drive you every morning when you wake up to do your own things, there is no way. Second, positive attitude, because the problems are there. So if you don't have positive attitude, you will not overcome them, especially in this era. Third, access to market, very important. New type of businesses, especially knowledge-based businesses, that the major factor is the knowledge, they need transnational access to new markets, transnational markets. You need more customers than a simple words. This is why we started 11 years ago to create the first network of young entrepreneurs in Greece and also connecting with Europe. Why? Because innovative businesses, we want to facilitate their access with new markets at European level. So instead of trying to sell products and services on the local cities and economies, try to see the 500 million of people on the 27 countries of Europe. But of course, this is the one part. The second part that we need for startup businesses is access to capital, and this is a really big obstacle at European and global level. Then we need less government, that's for sure. We need less bureaucracy. And I would like to use another concept. We would like the existing governments to become more entrepreneurial. So let's sit on the work entrepreneurial. Not only business creation, but we would like to think more entrepreneurial, even if we work on the private or the public sector, to be more goal-oriented. And finally, we need to foster the entrepreneurial mindset through education and learning. Last week I came from Dublin. We had a very important conference with EU, European Commission, trying to foster entrepreneurial training on the teachers of elementary schools. if we don't change the mentality of the new generations to think goal-oriented, more entrepreneurial, how we can implement and succeed with policies fostering entrepreneurial activity at European level. So access to markets, 2001. The European Confederation of Young Entrepreneurs, 16 member countries supporting the connection of young entrepreneurs to have customers, do businesses. Simple. 5th Global Entrepreneurship Week. In 2007, we connect for first time Greece with 126 countries. So young people, they have direct access with almost all around the globe. Every week, the 3rd week of November, we do activities. I invite also the University of Macedonia to be part of it, okay, to foster entrepreneurial activities between the students, recent graduates, and also to promote social entrepreneurship. That is very, very important for the cohesion of Europe. Just small numbers. In 2008, 77 countries. 2009, on the movement of GW, we had 88 countries. 2010, 104. 2011, 126 countries. Now let's go to the most crucial thing, access to capital. You know that there are many investors, venture capital investors and business angels all around Europe, that they do not invest in new innovative businesses, startup businesses. This is one of the problems, that we do not have innovation, okay? Because there is a small range, you will see in a graph later, from 50,000 to 500,000 that nobody wants to invest. It's very, very risky, okay? So you can see the graph. Since 1999 to 2005, the rate of return on the investment of the venture capitalists and the business angels, in Greece we do not have business angels, by the way. These are investors that they invest on the startups phase, or even prior on the seed capital, pre-seed, on a new innovative ideas. Let's see, these are data from Europe, okay? Early stage investment in 2006, not now that things are even worse at European level, all are negatives. So this is normal. People, companies or private individuals with wealth, they do not invest in startup businesses, okay? So we need to change that somehow. You can see from European Business Angel Network the statistics of 2011 June, number of companies financed in 2010, 863. And this number is out of the 27 countries of Europe with 500 million people. So this number is almost nothing, okay? So imagine how important is risk capital for creating innovation. This is a very famous valley of death. This is where innovation cannot proceed, okay? From 50 to maximum 500,000, when we don't have proof of concept yet of the business idea, this is the problem, that there are not public or private investors to risk the initial capital, okay? This is why we cannot create innovation. One of the solutions is crowdfunding. So some people starting, okay, putting their idea and starting asking from the crowd, from the society, this is very famous in the United States, to ask, let's say, donation funding to support the initial capital. But let's see what is the real problem at European level. Look this graph. This is the Eurostat graph of the median income of the citizen in Europe of the 27 countries. Very roughly, I don't want to take your time because I'm open for questions from you. You can see that the red box gives you a picture of almost 90-95% of the EU population, and the blue one, the blue box, 5% of the EU population. Very roughly, 95%, they have annual income, median annual income, less than 35,000 euros per year. So if you deduct the living expenses from this amount, imagine how much you have left to invest in your own idea. So an average person in Europe needs at least 10 to 15 years of savings to have an adequate capital to invest in their own idea. Who can invest on their own idea? People from the blue box, but they're only 5% of the population. So we cannot have a massive entrepreneurial activity or innovation growth if we do not support somehow the innovation to come from the people that they do not have access to capital. Until now, what the governments do at European and national level. 2 weeks ago, we had a discussion with IMF, because now they know that just putting taxes on the societies, just decreasing the salaries of the private sector or the pension is not enough to get the money that they lend to Greece back. They need somehow to support entrepreneurial activity, to support growth, to support job creation. But supporting entrepreneurial activity is not something that you put on the parliament for voting. Okay? You have to put every single resource of the society, every single citizen on the same direction. And this is the difficulty now. This is why you have to keep that in your mind. The government until now, at European level, they said, I give you some grants at national or EU level with the rule 50-50. You put 50, and I will give you the other 50 for your investment. Okay? However, a big number of the European citizens, they lack the 50% of co-investment on their own idea. Number one. Number two, important, the bureaucracy of the national governments make that 50% at the end to be necessary to have all the 100% capital investment until the time that the governors will approve the budget and will give you the 50%. So, for an average person, you remember the graph from the previous screen, they don't even want to touch this idea. Above that, the people that are responsible to decide the ideas that will be financed come from this side of the graph. So most of them, they don't have the feeling of which ideas are market-oriented and innovative. Okay? Because they are from the secure side. What do we propose now? We propose the following. We try to create an open mechanism at European level, so all the entrepreneurs, doesn't matter if they are young or older in the age, because new ideas come from every single age, to put their ideas. If the ideas they need to be protected, they file for a provisional patent. From the other side of the system, we accept, with a small accreditation, of course, all those people that they do not have ideas, but they have entrepreneurial mindset. They are business developers, let's say. So, those people, they start evaluating the ideas of the entrepreneurs, and those ideas that they get more business developers to want to cooperate with them, not with money, with time. If some business developers, they like the entrepreneurial ideas of these people, they say, I stop everything that I do in my everyday life, and I become partner of that entrepreneur. So I don't invest money, but I invest my time. And here, we put also volunteer mentors. They have life experience to see if the entrepreneurs and the business developers finally, they have a good coalition to work together. It's a very, very complicated mechanism. At the end, what we do, we create a mechanism that the ideas, the innovative ideas, has been assessed from the market. So the more people you want to cooperate with you, if you are a business idea person, an inventor as we say, the greater possibilities we have that the market will like your idea. So we don't close the evaluation process to some experts all over Europe. And finally, what we do. The problem until now of the global economy is that we take the money out from the real economy and we put them to the financial system, financialization. Now with entrepreneurial activity, we take again the wealth to the entrepreneurs, to the real economy. Doesn't matter the industry. Can be agricultural, can be knowledge base from engineering, can be ICT, can be tourism. Anything can be innovative and can be extroverted. Mentoring, very important. Seeing what happens in the European Union now. Last year, they did a symposium on entrepreneurship education, teachers' education as a critical success factor. So just to see the trends, that if we do not teach ourselves, if we don't teach the new generation to think entrepreneurial, we cannot succeed with business creations and job creation. Second, last week, European workshop for educators of teachers of entrepreneurship and education, initial teacher education, students that they are not yet in schools. And in September, we have another workshop for those that are in-service teachers. Some of you already are familiar with Erasmus for Young Entrepreneurs. 3 years ago, the European Commission launched a very huge portal that supports the mobility of recent graduates and early stage entrepreneurs to go to another European country for 3 or 6 months to get the feeling of another country mentality, to feel the common European market. Euro is the power, okay? Our proposal is to expand the Erasmus for Young Entrepreneurs also for teachers. So imagine, teachers of elementary schools to go for 3 or 6 months on another European business to get the mindset. Second, Erasmus for Young Entrepreneurs, now we have Erasmus and Leonardo for recent graduates. If you go and see the new portal, they force you to mobilize yourself at least 6 months during your studies and 6 months after you finish your studies to have an opportunity to travel in another country. Why? If you like a small and medium enterprise in another country, you can be their ambassador to your country and vice versa. Your Europe, a very important portal for those of you that are thinking to start a business. You can find many information for new markets in other European countries. Enterprise Europe Network, an initiative that connects innovative ideas all around Europe. Cordis, Community Research and Development Information Services, they have many EU research projects that they can finance researchers of our universities, and after they finish research, they can make a spin-off company out of the university. And the university can be an excellent incubator activity for their spin-off corporation. The same with Competitiveness and Innovation Framework Program at European level. And finally, mentoring. We try to utilize the experience of successful entrepreneurs to teach young generations informal training and non-formal learning. And keep in mind, in the future, we don't look anymore for a job, but we try to create a job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Stefanidis, for your very interesting talk. I just want to ask you a question. Do you think entrepreneurship is the answer to the current crisis?
I think the speech gave that feeling, but unfortunately, unemployment of youth, especially in Greece, 52%, there's no other solution. There's no other solution. We have to mobilize, we have to give incentives to new generation to try. Not all of them, they will not succeed, all of them, but they have to try. If 10 people try their own business and 2 of them succeed, we have tremendous job creation and wealth for the economy.
And how does Greece compare to other countries in terms of entrepreneurship? Are we very much behind?
It is behind, first of all, not because of the people. Traveling all over the world, I've seen that the entrepreneurial spirit of Greeks is tremendous. However, the government-oriented economy, number one, the huge bureaucracy, and the very individual way of the society itself creates the problem. I was last week in Dublin discussing with people from Finland. You know what they teach to the elementary schools, to the pupils? Participatory citizenship. So feel entrepreneurship, not just business creation for your own future, but feel entrepreneurship, even if you work for the public sector, to have an agenda, and at the end of the day, to have 3, 4, 5 things that have been done. Not just think that I have a secure job, I get my paycheck at the end of the month, and that's it. Because some other people outside, in the real world, they have to fight to find customers, to make marketing plans, to convince investors, to sell products and services at national or European level, to pay taxes at the end of the day, and you are in the same boat, as we say.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We can move on now to our second speaker, Terry Anker from the Anker Consulting Group.
Thank you for taking the time to see us today. I've got to walk over and put some notes on the podium. Over the last week, since I've been in Europe, I've been doing a market survey. I have been in Georgia, in Turkey, and now here in beautiful Greece. And I've been trying to discover what the competitive advantages are between Cha-Cha, Rocky, and Ouzo. Do you have a pick? Which is your favorite? Ouzo? It's interesting because Cha-Cha is cheapest. It's easiest to get in the market. Rocky is served a beautiful way. It turns into lion's milk. That's a great marketing opportunity. Ouzo is better, but it makes you have to stand at a podium so you don't fall down. The questions that we're asked today are about competitiveness versus harmonization. Well, the answer, of course, is that both matter. Both matter. But it's finding the balance between them. It's about the difference between using a safety net to make sure that there aren't orphans on the street and creating a hammock that people will sleep in instead of working. And I'll talk about it not because I'm a professor or even someone who's particularly learned. I have a degree in law, but my background is in private equity. I actually am that guy that invests in young individuals. People come to me who look like you and say that they have a really good idea. It's funny because I don't care as much about the idea as they might think. What I really care about is the person. Are you the kind of person that will care, will work hard to pay me back? I grew up on a farm in nowhere in the United States, not in New York, not in Los Angeles, a place that none of you have ever heard of. In the 1970s, so way before you were born, my parents came to me and said, you have to go do something else. You cannot live here with us. You cannot be on the farm. Interest rates were approaching 30%. People didn't have jobs. The government had said to farmers that they could not sell their products in the open market. They had made a decision because of a conflict that the United States was having with Russia, with the Soviet Union, that we could not sell our product in the marketplace for political reasons. Not because our product wasn't better, not because people in Russia didn't need food, but because for political reasons they said you can't sell your product. My family and many others lost so much money and so much hope. So much that my parents came to me and said, go somewhere else and find something else to do. I had no idea. My mother is one of 10 children. My dad is one of 6 children. They all lived within 10 miles of where I lived. No one left. I had 60 first cousins on my mom's side, my mother's side. We like to have sex in our family. And drink. Maybe they go together. But my parents taught me to take care of myself. They taught me to find opportunity for myself, not to wait for them to feed me, not to wait for anyone to care for me. It's funny, if you look around this room, I would guess, if you were like everyone else in the world, almost everyone here thinks they're better than most other people. You think you're smarter, you think you're better looking, clearly you're better looking. The same with the 4 of us. We all think that we're very good, probably better than the other people who've spoken to you today. At the end of the day, half of us are wrong. We're below average. We're not above average. Everyone cannot be above average. It doesn't work mathematically. Half of the people in this room, you will carry. If you are the above average person, you will carry the person next to you. So the key is creating a culture where each person does what they can do, instead of waiting for those of us who are above average to carry them. When I interview young entrepreneurs who are saying that they want to start a company, they want to tell me about their fantastic idea that works on a device that I don't own, that I don't know how to operate, but I listen to the way that they talk about themselves and their idea and what they think they can do to create value. Not about what they think that they want, but what they think they can do to create value, to create a new product, to create something different in the world. That's what I invest in. That's what matters to me. My wife says that I'm gainfully unemployed. I have not had a job since I was 25 years old. When I graduated from law school, I went to find jobs and no one wanted me. I know it's hard to imagine since you see how handsome and charming I am, but no one wanted me. They said that I wasn't at the top of my class and that there were few jobs for people who were in the top third perhaps, but not the top one. So I had to create opportunity. My parents had taught me that I could take care of myself, and not only could I, but that I had to. I must take care of myself. So I met a man who was much like me at that point, who was willing to invest in someone who was young and willing to work. He paid me very little. I was embarrassed compared to my degree. I thought I should be here because, well, we've all determined about me. But he said, no, you're beginning. You're here. If you do well, I will share what I make with you and you'll grow faster. In 2 years, we developed a company. And he came to me one day 2 weeks before Christmas and said, it's time to sell the company. I couldn't believe it. I thought I would own that company forever. And he said, no, that they have a life, and it's time to move on. I sold the company. What money my wife didn't take, I kept. She provides a home and takes care of me, which is necessary, actually. But I took and invested in another business. But I knew at that time that I was better at operating businesses than starting them. So I found other smart people, and I invested in them. And I helped them to launch their ideas and make their dreams come true. Over the years, we've done 24 or so businesses. Some have failed, and that's okay. It's actually even good. You invest money in something, and when it doesn't work, you evaluate it, and you decide whether to invest it again. You don't just invest forever because that's the plan you've chosen. You assess it, and if it doesn't work, then you do something else. If I decided out of my 3 drinks that Ouzo was the best, and yet I couldn't get it to sell, then I would decide that Rocky was the best, and I would sell it. It's easy to adapt. It's only difficult in your mind. Couple minutes? It's funny, I have 2 sons. One is 16 years old, one is 11 years old. Do you have brothers and sisters? They alternate between loving each other very much and beating the crap out of one another. We never know which will happen, but it's been interesting. I'll tell you a story about my oldest son. He was about 12 years old. My wife was out of the house, and we were home alone on a weekend together. He came to me and said, I would like to go visit my friend who lives in a nearby community, a mile perhaps, very short. He could walk. And I said, well, fine, then you have a bicycle, get on your bicycle and go visit your friend. He stopped and looked at me and said, do you want me to be killed? At that moment, I was thinking, perhaps. But no, I don't want you to be killed. Why would you say that? And he goes, well, I'll be killed if I ride my bike to see my friend. There are bad people who will hurt me. There are dangerous roads that I must cross. And when he saw that that argument wasn't working, he said, I don't know where my friend lives. Okay. So we got in the car, and I drove to his friend's house. And then I took him back to my house, and I said, now you know where your friend lives. He had to decide whether he cared enough to take the risk to go. Was it worth it to take that risk? It is possible that he could have been killed by a car. It is possible that he could have been kidnapped by a bad man, although it's incredibly unlikely. I've been lucky. I live in a very nice place. Kidnappings aren't that common. Never. So he learned that day that he could rely upon himself. Now, when he asked to drive a car, in the U.S. you can drive cars when you're 16, bad idea. He has to drive a car, but he believes that he can do it. He believes that he can drive a car. And I believe that he can do it because he's showing me that he can do it. So we gave him an old car. It's 19 years old. He loves the car, takes very good care of a 19-year-old car. His friends get a new car. They don't care. It was given to them. There was no earning it. They didn't prove to themselves that they could be responsible enough to have the car. Big government hurts people as much as it attempts to help. One more note card. Thank God I've got these because my memory is shot. My 11-year-old, following the older son, the 16-year-old, is very competitive. He routinely is fighting with the older brother to be better and stronger and faster, to keep up with the older brother. Now, occasionally that means that the younger boy will get a bloody nose, or he'll skin his elbow, or he'll come crying to the house and say, my brother was mean to me. Well, if he was mean, did he knock you down? No, he's better than I am. We say that's what it is. Go get better, and then you can compete with your brother. If his brother is unfair, if his brother hurts him, we will defend the younger son. But if his brother is simply better, bigger, stronger, we don't defend the younger one. He must learn that he's going to live in a world where there is competition. And sometimes there are people who can play the piano. I can't. Sometimes there are people that are thinner or better or smarter than I am. When we divide the room into the half that's smarter and the half that's not, I'm not sure which half I'm in. But I'm sure that I know how to get what I want regardless of what half I'm in. Isn't that what really matters? Isn't it more important that you learn how to take care of yourself than that we expect someone to take care of us? Closing remarks. I want my employees to replace me. We have 11 companies. In 7 of the companies, I'm a minority shareholder, meaning I have fewer shares than my business partner. So if I did business with you, you would own the company, and I would simply finance it. I want you to do well. I want you to do better than I would ever do, because I will do better. Now this is the harmony piece, but it comes after competition. I've already determined, of the hundreds of people that come to me looking for money or support or love, I've already determined the ones that are competitively better. And then comes cooperation. Once you graduate from school, I need to tell you something that perhaps your professors have not. Once you graduate, you all are in competition with all of us. It goes from us loving and supporting you to us looking at you as competitors for resources, for opportunity, for jobs, for women or men, depending on your choice. But you suddenly become our competition, not someone that we're holding up. It's a very different world than you think it's going to be. We stop loving you and protecting you and sheltering you, and we start knocking you down and saying, pay for us. Work harder so I can work less. That's the reality of life. It's okay. It just is. I'm not making a moral or a value judgment on it. I'm just saying you're foolish if you don't know that that's what to expect. So at the end of the day, if you are in competition with me, if you are weak, and I mean you, if you are weak, I will dominate you. I will find a way to control, and you will work for me. If you are strong, however, I will find a way to cooperate with you. I will make a partnership with you. I will find a way to work alongside you and take benefit from your strength. It's interesting to me, as we ask these questions, and the professors are far better skilled than I to talk about the economic movement in the euro and what's happening with politics in Europe. But I can say this, if individuals are strong, if you are strong, if you have ability, they can't stop you. If you are weak, if you are dependent on the state, if you need someone to tell you how to live, how to find opportunity, how to get a job, how to create an entrepreneurial opportunity for yourself, then they will always dominate you. They will be the strong. Government will be your overlord rather than a capitalist. Either way, you're still weak. I don't believe that Greece is weak. Over the last week or so, and certainly in the United States, Greece is held up as the launch of all good things in the world. Certainly, there are beautiful monuments here that we all discuss. So at some point, Greece has led the world. When did that slide? Has it? I don't know, but if you want to talk about it, I'll buy the ouzo.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ranker, for your very thought-provoking talk. I just want to ask you a question. Do you find, based on your U.S. experience, since you are coming from the other side of the Atlantic, do you find differences in, do you think there are differences in entrepreneurship between Europe and the U.S.? Do you find, do you think Europe is much more, less competitive and, than the U.S.?
I thought you were going to ask me where I was drinking last night. No, I don't think entrepreneurs are different anywhere in the world. I believe people are people, and strong people will succeed, and they will find a way to live. In much the same way that wildlife, plants grow in the most crazy, unusual places. It really depends on the plant, not the location, as to whether or not a plant can get foothold. That said, however, I do find that Europeans, and perhaps it has been the length of the civilization that has led to some of this, allow for far greater constraint in their thinking. It's not that the individuals are not perfectly capable or better educated or smarter or in any other way not better prepared to be entrepreneurs than Americans. It just seems as though the systems are more constraining. Europeans will line up for things. Americans don't tend to. It's just that mindset of following the accepted order. So I believe there's a strong future here, but it has to come from the bottom. It has to come from students, from people who are willing to say, I won't stand in line. If there is an enormous line, I will create a competitive business, so there is no line.
Okay, thank you. We can now move on to our next speaker, Dr. Azin Salih from the European Center for International Political Economy.
Thank you, Professor. Good evening, everybody. I'll sit down during my talk. I had 1 hour of concentrated mobility during my yoga session this afternoon, so I'm quite happy to sit down for the rest of the evening. Professor Karfakis, in his speech, mentioned briefly something about Asia. So let me start with a Europe-Asia comparison. To begin with, I'm half European and half Asian. Half of me is British. It's Welsh, actually, but I don't advertise that all that often. And the other half is Sri Lankan, which I do advertise because it sounds rather exotic. I lived in Europe for years and years. I taught at the London School of Economics, and I set up a little think tank in Brussels, which is doing very well. But recently I moved to Asia, and I now live and work and teach in Singapore, the Lion City. So now I look at Europe from the outside. I live in Asia, and I visit Europe from time to time, not the other way around. So just a few comparative observations to begin with. Looking at Europe from the outside, what I hear and what I see are not only signs of Eurosclerosis, along the lines of what we saw in the 1970s, but the responses to this, more often than not, are collectivist responses. So we hear arguments for more harmonization of policy, for more power at the central level, for more centralization, all in the name of, in quotation marks, more Europe, as if more Europe is synonymous with more harmonization and more centralization. What is happening in Asia is very different. Of course, there are repressive governments all over Asia, not least in China, and individuals are repressed in all kinds of ways. But the tendency over the last 3 decades or so is very much in the direction of individualism and the vast expansion of individual freedom. And it starts with economic freedom. Governments, usually because they've been stuck in a crisis, in many cases crises worse than what you're experiencing in Greece at the moment, though that may be difficult to imagine, have unleashed various reforms, sometimes reluctantly, but it's happened. And what's happened in the process is that individuals, not just the elites, whether in business or in politics, have had more space to transform their lives. So what we've seen with this aggregation of individuals all over the Asian continent is a huge collective awakening. And what it's doing now, and I can give you countless stories of how this is happening all over Asia, what it's doing is it's pushing governments gradually in the direction of more liberalization and more reform. Perhaps the best example of that today is what is happening in China. The last time I gave a lecture in Beijing, about just under a year ago, it was to a group of Chinese dissidents at Tsinghua University, which is the #2 university in China. And they were twittering away while I was talking on their equivalent of Twitter, which is called Sina Weibo. And quite in an unanticipated way, but that's the way markets and that's the way freedom works. In an unanticipated way, this Twittering phenomenon, this social media phenomenon, has put enormous pressure on the government and on the Communist Party leadership. And they will have to respond in some way or other. And it looks like they're responding in a more liberal direction. The jury is out on that. So for me, there are plenty of lessons from Asia for Europe, and it's very much in the direction of decentralization and more individual freedom. There are few, if any, lessons in the other direction. In Singapore and elsewhere, I constantly come across European politicians and officials from the Commission and elsewhere who come touting the so-called EU model, arguing for more centralization of policy to bring about all sorts of good things. That's not the way success has worked in Asia, and that's certainly not the advice Asian governments and Asian citizens should heed. Let me now get to the meat and drink of the policy issues, and this is about Europe, it's not about Asia. And what the euro crisis does is really crystallize stark options between more centralization, sticking with the euro, going beyond the euro to have a common fiscal policy, that's to say harmonizing policies on taxation and expenditure, and the argument for going even further to harmonize labor markets, harmonize environmental policies, corporate governance, financial regulation, and so on. The other road is very much one of strong decentralization of policy. It means keeping fiscal policies, the ability to tax and spend at the national level, where governments and parliaments are much more accountable to their peoples than in Brussels. It means decentralizing power that already exists in Brussels on education, on research, on employment regulation, on financial markets, and so on. It means possibly dismembering the euro itself, which the markets will probably bring about spontaneously without any grand design, and having more of a competition of currencies. So those are the choices available. Let me make just a brief diversion into what is in essence the big debate on Europe. And it's an age-old debate. What we're seeing is a new formulation of it. It goes back to the debate between Paris and Edinburgh in the 18th century, between the French Enlightenment and the Scottish Enlightenment. The French Enlightenment always has been about a grand Cartesian design, very much with an engineering mentality behind it, to deliver, to engineer certain outcomes for society. And that was how Voltaire and Diderot and Rousseau as well thought about the future of Europe. The Europe that Adam Smith and David Hume saw and foresaw, envisioned from their perch in the Edinburgh of the mid-18th century, was very much a Europe that resembles the motto of the United States, e pluribus unum, out of many one, but spontaneously, bottom up, from below, not through some kind of grand design from above. Now, we've seen echoes of that debate throughout the process of European integration, so-called, from the 1950s. Back in the 1950s, the big debate was between those who favored the so-called small Europe. They were mainly the French elites, but some others as well. And they wanted to plan markets, beginning with coal and steel, extending it to agriculture and many other areas besides. And we've seen that filter through the history of European integration, from the coal and steel community to the EEC to the EU now. But on the other side of the debate were not the British Eurosceptics, but some of the German elite, led by Ludwig Erhard, who was Germany's reform-minded liberal economics minister and very much the envisioner of the German economic miracle, and a small group of economists and lawyers and others around him. And their idea was of a big Europe, not a small club to plan markets, but as large a group of European liberal democracies that would have liberal economic policies at home and free trade abroad and sound money in the middle. And this was very much what national governments should do. It shouldn't rely on supranational organizations because they bring with them bureaucracy and creeping intervention. Yes, there would be need for cooperation among governments to liberalize the European market at home and to have freer trade abroad, partly through negotiations in what was then the GATT, now the WTO. But the emphasis was very much on a bottom-up Europe. What we have today is very much a political compromise, a hybrid. So we have some elements of the small Europe, notably the common agricultural policy, but we have other elements of the big Europe. We've seen that through the expansion of the European Union, now to 27. It's much more difficult to plan if you're 27 as opposed to 6. And we've seen that through the establishment of a still-to-be-completed single market. That brings me to the present and the euro crisis. Now, the euro itself, the plan for it, the realization of it, is very much the product of a French Enlightenment style of thinking and of a small Europe style of thinking. It is about a plan to engineer certain markets through the creation of an artificial currency with the aim, and this was the aim of some of the founding fathers, to further political integration. The original birth defect of the euro was that the economics, and indeed the politics, I'll come to that in a moment, but starting with the economics of the issue simply didn't fit that objective of political integration. A euro makes sense. It makes sense in Germany and in the satellites of the German economy. That would have happened, an enlarged D-mark zone, if you like, without any grand plan. But a euro for 27 never made sense to begin with, and it certainly didn't make sense to have Greece, and not just Greece, but many other countries as well, in the Eurozone, because they were never going to be able to stick by those rules. That includes Spain and Italy as well, by the way, and possibly France and possibly Belgium, so it's not just Greece. Now, what we saw, I think, in Greece, as in other members of the so-called European periphery, was first, before the euro, an avalanche of subsidies being used to abdicate national responsibility. So countries began to live beyond their means through European subsidies because the responsibility was held elsewhere and not at home. The euro is an extension of that. As has been explained earlier, Greece and other countries thought they benefited from artificially low German interest rates effectively to borrow like there was no tomorrow at the level of the household, at the level of the corporation, and at the level of the government. And everything's come home to roost after the global financial crisis, which has revealed the extent of this huge debt overhang. Now, the response initially of the EU's elites was to deny that the problem was there. The markets forced them to recognize the problem halfway, but their response to it has been to centralize even further. And there are three main responses. The first is to move to fiscal union, further policy harmonization, with so-called automatic rules. The second is to have various European funds, and it's going to be the so-called European Stability Mechanism in the main, to bail out governments on condition that they will reform themselves. And the third condition has been the utter corruption of the European Central Bank, which no longer even remotely resembles the old, hard, strong German Bundesbank. So we see a wholesale abdication on all three fronts of that vision of the big Europe of Ludwig Erhard and others who favored what the Germans call Ordnungspolitik. Policy by order is the rough English translation. It doesn't translate well in the UK because people think of law and order and lashing and whipping and all sorts of sadomasochistic activities. But it essentially means thinking constitutionally and acting constitutionally for a predictable, stable economic order that ensures the freedom, the maximal freedom of the individual. Now, this is not going to work, and it's not going to work for three main reasons. Firstly, fiscal union is never going to be that kind of policy of order that the Germans envisaged back in the 1950s and 1960s. It's going to be all about political compromises in the direction of relaxing, diluting, and corrupting rules so that there's more government spending and an even greater buildup of debt. We're already seeing that with the reaction to the Greek election, the French election, what's happened in the Netherlands, what's happened in North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany with yesterday's election, and so on. Secondly, the Germans are simply not going to accept, for very understandable reasons, to be the paymasters for profligate countries in the rest of Europe. They've undergone their structural reforms in the last decade or so. They've held down their wages, and they're now expected by the French and others to bail out the rest. They will do so up to a point, but not to a sufficient point to make the markets happy in the short term. The third reason is perhaps the most important of the lot. European publics are still very skeptical of the kind of European integration that stems from the French Enlightenment and small Europe thinking. They don't buy it, but their elites are forcing more and more of it upon them. The backlash is already happening, and the backlash is going to get worse. The pity of it is that much of this backlash against immigrants, against foreign workers, against competition in free markets, more protectionism against the outside world, will be, well, as I've indicated, less liberal as opposed to more liberal. So what needs to be done? And I have three concluding points to make here. The first point is a reality check. Many people speculate now, experts and pundits, on the future of the euro. I find it difficult to believe, on basic economic grounds, but also on political grounds, that the euro is going to survive. I think the euro will break up in some form or other, and possibly sooner rather than later. I think a Greek exit from the euro is 99.95% likely, but it will not be limited to Greece. It will, in all likelihood, spread first to Portugal, and then possibly to Spain, possibly to Ireland, possibly to Italy, and beyond. And we'll see a reconstitution of the Eurozone in one form or other. What we need for that eventuality is a plan B, which our truly mediocre political and bureaucratic elites across Europe simply don't have, because ostrich-like, they have their heads stuck in plan A, which is to save the euro at all costs. That's the first point. The second point is that we still have a single market, thankfully, which needs to be protected and defended from all the pressures that are going to come on it, and they are going to increase. But we need to complete the single market. It's only half complete. We have a sort of single market in industrial goods, but we do not have one in services, which is 70% of the European economy. We don't have one in energy either. Here we have highly protected national markets. So there's a lot of unfinished business at the European level, which involves cooperation among governments. The third element, which is arguably the most important one, is to decentralize more power from Brussels and from intergovernmental cartels, as it were, to the national level, and yes, even to the subnational level, closest to the citizen. And that's supposed to be the principle of subsidiarity in Europe, which is more often than not, most often than not, honored in the breach. It simply doesn't operate. Those are the three elements. Is it politically likely that they will combine and happen? At the moment, it looks unlikely. I, at the moment, am someone, and this is my pragmatic head speaking as opposed to my ideological heart, would like to see this happen within the present European Union, because the costs of a breakup of the European Union would be very damaging indeed. But if it's not likely to happen within the EU, as currently constituted, then the British and others should start thinking of alternative arrangements. And the ideal here would be something like Switzerland, but lots of Switzerland all around Europe. And Switzerland is one of the few places in Europe that actually still works today. The reason why it works is because it has very decentralized power, and it has low taxes and low spending, at least by European levels, and more space for the European individual. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sally. That was a very interesting talk. I just want to ask a couple of questions. You mentioned that it's almost a certainty that the euro will collapse, and this might happen quite soon. Now, if the euro collapses, do you think it would be better if we have a two-speed Europe where some countries around Germany stick to a new common currency and the rest of the countries in the periphery of Europe use their own currency to compete with the euro? And second, do you think that the collapse of the euro might have severe implications for the well-being of the European Union? Do you think the European Union will survive following a collapse of the euro?
Well, to take your first point, Professor, there are various permutations and combinations. I mean, I can gaze into my crystal ball like anybody else. The answer is I don't know. I can only hazard a few guesses. The cleanest breakup would be essentially a two-speed set of currency arrangements. So you would have Euro 1 based on Germany and involving the economies that are hooked into the German economy, like the Netherlands, Austria, some of the Eastern European, the Central European economies, perhaps the Nordic economies, who would adopt essentially a D Mark II and adjust their fiscal policies accordingly. So you'd have a sort of natural currency union there. It wouldn't require huge centralization and a huge bureaucracy in Brussels. This could simply be done by governments adapting to German monetary policy. And it would involve a substantial revaluation of the present euro, which would in the short term hurt German and other manufacturing exporters, but in the short term, they're competitive. They will adjust, just as they've done in the past, to a strong Deutschmark. A Euro 2 would involve the other countries, possibly including France and Belgium, with a substantial devaluation. That's the cleanest scenario for a breakup. There are other scenarios, of course, which are more messy, which would involve not one Euro 2, but several Euro 2s. whatever way the euro breaks up is going to be extremely messy. Because, of course, so many of our payments are denominated in euro. Capital markets use euros as the second major currency in the world. And, of course, this will reverberate through international financial markets as well, given that the euro is number 2 in the world payment system. So whatever way it happens in the short term, it's going to be very messy and there's going to be a lot of damage. And it will make, the bottom line here is that it will make the present European recession worse, possibly much worse, before things can get better. What about the collateral damage going beyond the currency, was your second question. Well, here I have great anxiety. I fear that a collapse of the euro would turn Europe back to the 1970s. What we saw in the 1970s in response to the oil price shocks was European governments turn inwards. Initially, they expanded spending and taxation. They further regulated labor markets, and they had protectionism against each other as well as against the outside world. It was called the new protectionism, or the euphemism managed trade, back in the 1970s. So we would be at risk of seeing a replay of that as collateral damage. We would see a fraying of the single market as government after government start raising barriers, initially to people, and then to goods and services and capital, and this would spill over into international capital markets and into international trade. That's, if you like, the negative scenario, and of course it could be the slippery slope to a true dystopia, which is why we need Plan B, because Plan A is simply not viable, it's not sustainable. It's very much about sticking one's head in the sand like an ostrich. Just the other week, I was at a student symposium in St. Gallen in Switzerland. Jean-Claude Trichet was there. Of course, he had the liberty to be more frank than he did when he was the head of the ECB. But his responses to questions by the BBC presenter Stephen Sacco, who anchors a program called Hard Talk, and you had British-style interviewing. It wasn't about fawning. It was about asking him hard questions, sometimes hostile. His response was to say, we have to stick to Plan A because there is no alternative. And when asked the question, what happens if Greece leaves the euro? His answer was, Greece won't leave the euro. The euro will remain intact. And everybody will act according to instructions because that's what the member governments agreed. That's classic French Cartesian social engineering thinking. Because governments agreed it, it will happen. Well, the reality is it won't.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we can open the floor for questions. Yes. Oh yeah, sorry. No.
Thank you. Well, I'm addressing to the last speaker. What were the components leading to the introduction of the US dollar that does not exist in Europe today, leading you to suggest that euro will break? This is my question. Thank you.
Well, I think this is a question our American colleague should have a stab at answering because he'll be able to tell you much more about the conditions that brought about union, including currency union in the United States. But let me answer your question by sticking to Europe. The enabling conditions are simply very different. the United States did not begin Stunde Null, as the Germans say, either in 1776 or in 1789. There were all sorts of conditions with a common heritage, with shared values, with a common history that enabled the different states to come together into the United States of America and have a common market and a common currency and so on. Those conditions might, at a stretch, exist or might have existed among some small countries, a handful in Europe, but it's never been the case in Europe. We retain very different histories, very different ways of doing things. We have come together in a common market. I would like to see us stick together with a kind of common denominator of the common market that's not only open at home but open abroad, where the main emphasis is on having negative rules, as it were, common rules that tell us what not to do so that we don't intrude on the liberty of others, but otherwise leave us free to do as we wish. We don't, I think, have the common heritage, let alone the basic economic conditions, not least as far as a currency is concerned, to go several leaps beyond that. If we are to have more European integration, more Europe, to use the catchphrase, it should be to work with the grain of what already is. And the European publics are telling us, not least because they don't move across borders the way Americans do, across the states of the Union, that the elites are pushing European citizens in a direction they don't want to go in, or it's simply going too fast. That, I think, is the basic difference. We are not the United States of Europe.
And one more question, if I may. Suppose that Europe disappears at once. What are the other policies that Europe should concentrate its energy? And where is the last point of transferring things into Europe, to Europe?
Sorry, would you repeat just the last bit of your question, please?
Okay, I repeat the whole question. Suppose that Europe disappears at some time. What are the other policies that Europe must concentrate its energy? There is no common monetary policy. We return to status before. What are the other policies, the main policies that should attract Europe's energy? And where is the second question? The second part of the question, what is the end of shifting things to Europe, national things to Europe?
To take your first question, my response would be in the form of a motto, less is more. What the elites in Brussels and in the national capitals are trying to do is to have more artificial integration on multiple fronts. The answer, and it's not rocket science, is that they end up messing things up on all fronts. The answer is a very economic one. It's to economize. Concentrate on doing a fewer things which are necessary and doing them much better, and leave other things to markets and individuals. So don't try to harmonize policies across the board. Concentrate, if we are to have a European Union, on a common market, a truly liberal market across the borders of the 27, 28, if when Croatia comes in next year, and to keep this common market as open as possible to the outside world. Now those are policies and laws and regulations that are not, as an old, one of the most famous professors at the LSE put it, written down on half a sheet of notepaper. They're complicated, but it's a much smaller agenda than what we have at the moment. And it's an extension of what we should be thinking about at the national level and also at the municipal level. In other words, it's about limiting government to what Jeremy Bentham called an agenda and staying clear of what he called a non-agenda. And you stick to certain things in the form of basic public goods, as it were, that enable competition and cooperation to take place voluntarily among individuals. And you leave everything else to the spontaneous order, if you like. So that should have its lessons for the European level, just as it should have its lessons for the national level and the subnational level. There was one German sociologist come political scientist who was very much part of this Erhard circle, who had the catchphrase, the strong but small state. For a state to be strong, to be really effective, to perform its core functions, it's got to be small. And as knave-proof as possible, as David Hume once put it. In other words, not as open as possible to all the special interests. But if it's big, it's bound to be weak and ineffective.
I think that applies very fully to the United States as well, Rasim. When you look at the challenges that the United States is facing now and has over the last several years, it's largely because we've significantly engorged the federal apparatus. In other words, the very top level of government, and we've taken those powers away from the state level. What's happened, I'll use a simple example. In the United States, cheese is manufactured under federal government mandate. It's restricted. So we have horrible cheese often in the United States. The reason for that is because there's no opportunity for competition between the states on what they would prefer for their citizens to do as far as assumption of risk goes. Cheese is pasteurized in the United States, meaning that they boil it to death, arguably. And it's boiled because federal mandate suggests that there's a possibility, although a slim one, that someone might get sick because they ate cheese that has a microbe or something in it that's unsafe. It used to be that individual states had the right to choose whether they preferred to allow their citizens to take that risk or not. The federal government, in its infinite wisdom, has decided that that risk is too great. Someone asked me earlier today why there's so much discussion about members of the administration who are lawyers. Well, as a lawyer, I can say it's because we are trained to avoid risk. Absolutely avoid it. I get paid as a lawyer, whether there's risk or not. It's the same amount that I earn. But if there is risk and you fail, then you're blaming me. On the other hand, as an entrepreneur, I've learned that the space between failure and no risk is where the real margin is, where the real opportunity lies. And so when the state pushes me away from risk, when I was a young boy living on a farm in Indiana, I had to assume risk in order to get out of there, in order to do something else with my life. Today, the U.S. government would be far more inclined to tell me to stay where I was, because I would be more safe if I stayed home and they took care of me. The fact that I broke away and went and did something else meant that assumption of risk that causes them concern. As the euro forces the independent states to a flat content, I worry tremendously about how they can be competitive with each other. It takes away the advantages that Greece has, perhaps, as much as it gives you advantages.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Good evening. I would like to ask a question referring the last honorable speaker, and I would like to ask how would the European Union could withstand the collateral effects of a possibly exit of Greece from Eurozone, in terms that it would be impossible for Germany and its satellite countries to cover the gap and to hold a strong and whole European Union. And is it possibly for Germany and its satellites and European banks to withstand the shock? Thank you.
That's it, you.
Sorry, I didn't understand the question. Would you speak a little more slowly, please?
Yeah. How would European Union withstand the collateral effects of a possibly exit of Greece from Eurozone, in terms that it would be possibly impossible for Germany and its satellites to cover the gap and to hold a strong and whole European Union? And is it possibly for Germany and its satellites countries, the Netherlands, Finland, and European banks to withstand the shock?
I think we've discussed part of your question in terms of what might happen to the currency if the euro were to break up. We haven't discussed banks. Let me say something about banks. But one part of your question is, would Germany be able to carry the can? That's the 64,000 euro one question. I don't know. I'm not sure. I have a feeling the effects will be very differentiated. Germany will suffer as well. So with a breakup of the euro, most likely Germany will be tipped into recession from reasonably healthy rates of growth since the global financial crisis. The question is much more how governments, and above all peoples, adjust to these shocks. So will the German government and will the German people and the countries around Germany adapt faster, better than what we've seen in Greece, Spain, Italy, and so on? I don't know is the answer. I think there are credits and there are debits, but you would have to ask an expert on the German economy and on German politics to answer that part of the question. But let me say something about the banks, which I didn't really, given my time constraint, I didn't go into. It's very much part of the story. A false currency and false political arrangements and false hopes have also encouraged extremely dodgy banking in Europe, which is a reflection of what's happened on a global scale. And goodness knows we've seen our fair share of that in Britain, in the City of London as well. But the euro and its arrangements have provided a free pass for French and German banks in particular to lend like there was no tomorrow, risk-free, to the Greek government, to other sovereigns, as well as to private debtors. And typical, of course, in a rigged market, which is a reflection of Goldman Sachs on a global scale, they want the governments to bail them out. And governments have half bailed them out, but more recently the European Central Bank has bailed them out big time, to the tune of $1 trillion, 1 trillion euros. And now they're calling for more from the European Central Bank, effectively acting as Europe's cash dispenser. And so what we have is a continuing problem of sick banks in Europe, which is a reflection of what Japan has had for the last 20 years. And Japan hasn't tackled its problem either, which is why Japan is stagnating. So you have sick banks being propped up with a drip feed of cheap money, debt, which in turn allows them to prop up sovereigns. And so you have a continuation of what is effectively a triple crisis in Europe: a banking crisis, a sovereign debt crisis, and a currency crisis. Now, I mentioned some elements of a possible European solution, but I didn't mention the banks. That's an important fourth element. We have got to get to the stage. I don't think we can do this at the European level because we have 27 different financial systems. There are attempts to do this at the European level, which are much more in the direction of extra-intrusive regulation rather than real treatment of the underlying cause. This has got to happen, among other things, at the national level and gradually aggregate into a European solution, as it were. But what's got to happen is that governments and their regulators have got to separate plain vanilla banking, as it's called, retail banking effectively, from the casino. Now in Britain, in a pioneering way, it doesn't go as far as some people would like, but it's better than anything else on offer in terms of practical policy. The proposal, which the government says it's going to implement, is to effectively have a sort of fence between retail banking, where there would be some sort of government guarantee to protect depositors. We can argue about that. But to separate it from investment and other forms of banking, where one is effectively playing in the casino. And the argument is, if you play in the casino, you play with your own money. You don't play with depositors' money, and you don't play with taxpayers' money. Now, how that's going to work, if that's going to work, is another big question. Whether that's going to be seriously entertained, let alone implemented, in Germany and Switzerland and other places that have so-called universal banks, is also another big question. But we need to address that central question, because if we don't, we will have gigantic so-called moral hazard. We will be giving a free pass to banks deemed too big to fail to continue to play in the casino with depositors and taxpayers' money, stoking the next crisis and the crisis beyond. And that's not just an economic issue, it's a deeply political issue as well, because this is very much about special interests at the heart of government and politics. And it's very difficult to attack unions and all sorts of so-called liberal professions, which of course are really illiberal, for their cartel-like arrangements, when we don't do anything about this basic problem in the financial system. So the bottom line of liberalism, which is non-discrimination, is to tackle this fault line in the banking system as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time for questions because we have already run into the break time. So I would like to thank all our three speakers for their very interesting talks, and we can move on to the break now.
We will take a short break now for about 20 minutes for a coffee break. I would like to add that for the last question, there will be more detailed discussion at the next panel. Okay.